Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Most of you who are watching this program today have a computer. To protect your computer's operating system, you've installed a virus protection system. You might also have malware and software protection. And some of you have seen TV commercials and print ads for online programs to fix damaged computer software. All this adds up to tens of billions of dollars. Now, what exactly is it we're protecting ourselves from? Our guest today, Dennis Bouvier, will attempt to explain in layman's terms the answer to that question. Professor Bouvier learned about computers and how to program them at the age of 16 using a book borrowed from a friend and a computer at his grandmother's house. Now he's an associate professor of computer science and serves as the acting chair of the computer science department at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Dr. Bouvier, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you.
So I've covered your background a little bit. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than suddenly you go from sitting in your grandmother's basement with a computer to being the acting chair of the computer science department. But I guess the real question is, and that's what we're going to get in here today, is what is going on with people like yourself who decided instead of to use their talents for something positive, they created viruses and malware and spyware, which most people don't even understand what it is that we're talking about. All they know is that it's a problem and it costs them money.
That's a very interesting question. There's a term that gets used called hackers. And the original hackers were people who just wanted to do clever things with computers. So they found something that was working, but they thought they could do something different, do something really neat. So they would, for example, it's kind of an odd example, but just to put it out there, they'd write programs that would make computing equipment dance across the floor because they could write a program to make the machine actually move in a particular way. And of course the computer wasn't meant to dance, but it was something they could do, and it was fun, so that it was just a creative outlet. So some of these hacking activities led to things. They found out that they could change programs to do different things. And so, and that's sort of the beginning of malware, the beginning of viruses, is changing a program to do something different. And
pause there for just a second.
Sure.
We're talking personal computers here, right, in the main. And as I recall, personal computers really didn't become available until like the 1980s.
Right.
I mean, there were computers in the 70s, but you had to be a real geek to be using those because they were in a language called DOS, disk operating system.
Right.
And it was pretty tough unless you actually knew what you were doing. So are we talking about people starting around the 1980s who started playing these mind games with computers?
Oh, the mind games started well before that.
Really? Okay.
As soon as
and what do you mean by dancing? You mean the machine actually?
We're physically moving across the room. So
how do you tell a machine? I mean, it's an inert object. How do you tell it to bounce around? I mean, it's a box.
So a little computer history. Computing really started with World War II when the federal government needed machines to help them win the war.
Okay.
And so the first computer was built primarily with the purpose of coming up with ballistics trajectory tables, because the old paper process of figuring out how to set the weapon to hit the target was slow and tedious. So they built a computer that was literally the size of a room, a large room, just to do these simple numeric calculations to help the field troops. So the original computers were room-sized devices. And as technology improved from the 40s to the 50s, they shrank to vending the size of a vending machine, and then small vending machines, and finally, eventually to the 80s, we got to a machine that will sit in your desk, and now in the 2000s, I have a computer in my pocket. Actually, I have one in each pocket. But you know, the original dancing computers was in the 60s and the 70s when a computer would have been the size of a washing machine. Well, there's large mechanical parts inside that machine, and if you get those parts to move to the left and then move to the right, if you did it at the right timing, you could literally get the machine to rock and start dancing across the room. It's not something that...
This is meant to be funny?
Funny, yeah. It's just, hey, can I make this thing do something it was not intended to do? A creative outlet. The people who were working computers at that time were probably some of the brightest people in the country, and they were just releasing their creative juices. And so
they weren't trying to do damage, they were just trying to...
No, they were entertaining themselves.
Right, they were being funny.
It was kind of like a fraternity. Let me see if I can do something to amuse my friends. And so if I can get the machine to move across the room, that would be really clever, because no one else thought of that. And that idea, the original hackers were people who just wanted to do something fun with a computer, to take something that had a real specific purpose and make it do something wacky, and wouldn't that be fun? And then you mentioned the personal computer era. So another important part of the story of malware and viruses is that originally computers were independent devices, then they weren't connected to each other.
Right.
So without networking, we probably don't have anywhere near the number of viruses and other problems that we have today. So as I began this sort of long story, the term hacker was originally just someone who's creative and taking something useful and then having it do something unusual. Now the term hacker has come to have a negative term, that it's someone who's doing something bad with a computer, not creative. And it is creative in a sense, but it's creative for a bad purpose.
So we have three words here that we're working on. We have virus, we have malware, we have spyware. Now, they may all really, in your mind, be the same thing, code, but define what is a virus, and then we'll move on to the other two.
Okay, a virus is a program that, like a human virus or an animal virus, can replicate itself. So the way you get a cold is you get one virus and it replicates, and you have many viruses until there's too many for your body to handle. So that replication is the reason why we gave the term to what we call a program that's a virus can replicate itself. So your program, or rather your computer, may be infected with a virus, and it will replicate itself into other places on your computer, and we would call that a virus.
What's the attempt here?
The general understanding is that there are two reasons for writing viruses, and one is back to that traditional term of hacker, is just doing something creative. So if I'm a high schooler and I'm really bright, but I'm not being challenged in school, I might find other ways to express my creative talents. And I might, like the programmers in the 60s, have some of my friends I want to impress, and I might impress them by getting my name on a virus on their computer or their friend's computer, or perhaps even in the news. Of course, they don't use their real name because they don't want to get in trouble. They'll use their pseudonym, their nickname. And so they can claim, hey, I created this virus, and it wasn't with malicious intent, it was just a school prank.
Now, these were not crimes in the early days.
No,
but they are now, aren't they?
They are now. So you asked why viruses, and I gave you one of the two answers, and the second one is money.
Oh, money.
Money. So a reason for me to create a virus is to be able to infect many computers so they'll send email for me, because spam email is a profit-making business. If you've ever gotten an email from somebody saying, you know, my friend told me how to cure eczema, or here's how to make sure money in the stock market, or this prince in Saudi Arabia has money that he wants to put in your bank account.
Yes, of course he does.
Of course he does. people have devised ways to stop these email messages. They recognize the same message being sent out over and over again, but people are still profiting from these malicious emails. So how can they get them through if there's a filter on my email and it's stopping all these Saudi Arabian prince email messages from coming through? The way they can get email to me is by infecting my sister's computer and having her computer send me email, because my filter recognizes my sister's email address and sends the email anyway, even though there are telltale signs of it being a malicious email. In fact, my sister's computer does have a virus right now, and I've been getting an email message from her about once a day about different things. This morning's was about eczema. I forget what yesterday's was about, but until she gets that virus on her computer fixed, I'll continue to get these email messages past my filter. Now, I get probably 50 or 100 email messages a day I never see because a filter is blocking them. But the ones from her get through because they're from her. So if I want to be more effective in my advertising campaign, I want to infect other people's computers so that their friends and family will get email about my product.
So you're actually multiplying your ability by going out and finding all the, well, that movie, what was it, Terminator? Where you know the at the end of the second movie, we suddenly come to find out that the all the computers in people's houses have been infected and are all part of this plot against humanity. That's sort of what you're talking about here.
Yes, yes. So,
and I also have heard that there are some hackers that have some programs that they actually do go and nest in people's computers, and then have a ton of these computers all generating some sort of calculation in order to solve some problem or to accomplish some task, which is not necessarily anything that you know about, or it might even be benign, but they're just using all this computing power.
That is entirely possible. There are some that are publicly known. I think one of the first one was the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, that you could sign up and download this screensaver, that when your computer screensaver started, it actually would contact the organization that was sponsoring this project, download data and process it, and then send the results back. It's entirely possible for people to infect your computer to do the same sort of thing without your permission, so that we can harness the unused computing power. And they may think, well, they're not doing anything anyway, so why not use their computer? But
so these companies like Norton and others that have programs that you pay money for, what exactly are these? Are you paying for? What do you get out of this?
You get, generally speaking, pretty good protection from viruses. And
how does it know? I guess that's the real question. How does it realize that there's good data and there's bad data, and it knows the bad data and blocks it?
It's very similar to how medicine works. So we don't know what diseases exist until we observe them, and then there's research done to try to figure out how to combat it, and then drugs may be developed. The same sort of thing happens at Norton and other software protection services. Is a virus gets created and they observe it. Well, unfortunately for some people, they were infected when that virus was first created. But Norton and McAfee and the other malware vendors, not that they're selling malware, but malware protection vendors, will observe this, and then they'll study it to figure out, how do I recognize this particular piece of malware or virus or whatever it happens to be? And when they get what they call a signature for that malware, they put it in a library and they send that update of the library to your computer. So your copy of Norton or McAfee or whatever you're running has a library of known malware.
But you got to update it.
That gets updated possibly every day, so that it knows what it doesn't know, but it can recognize the newer viruses that are coming out.
How long is the turnaround time once some kid or an adult develops some virus and unleashes it. How long does it take before Norton or McAfee, in their geeks in the back, are able to recognize this thing and eventually, so from the time they first hear about it to the time protection is added onto the home computer that's online?
It varies. It can be as quick as a couple of days, or maybe even one day, to weeks or maybe months. And the reason why the great difference is because some viruses propagate very quickly, and therefore they're noticed very quickly, and they get a lot of attention, and so the response is very quick. Other viruses replicate very slowly, and may lay dormant and not really show any signs of their existence for weeks or months at a time, intentionally. And so it's not until you know it's there that you can actually do the investigation. And so an infection may be spread far and wide before anyone knows it exists.
So 2 quick questions. One, the free software, which is available online, is it as good as something that you're going to purchase for $40, $50?
Your mileage may vary, but generally not. In fact, some of the free virus protection software is actually virus software. And so
well, there's like what is it, AVG or AGV or something like that, which a lot of people use, which is free online, which seems to work fairly well.
And that is a legitimate virus protection program. But there are others that you may see advertised that are not. And when you download them, basically what you're downloading is a virus.
You've just asked
more than one virus. And so you go from being in an okay state to suddenly having a dozen viruses or more on your computer, and some of these are particularly nasty because you invited them in and gave them permission to really nest well in your computer. And I've heard of situations where they've basically just abandoned the computer and bought a new one because it was too hard to remove all the viruses.
And then the second part of the question is, I mean, you teach young people computer programming. So
Yes.
some of these kids, young people, are they become hackers. What is it that motivates someone to do that kind of damage to their friends and neighbors?
Well, I'd like to think that none of my students go on to do malicious
Well, I hope
things,
not.
but yeah, I hope not.
SIU is a good place, and a good, by the way, an excellent engineering school. I have heard nothing but good things about the engineering school there.
Well, thank you. But you have to think about, again, if we're thinking about high schoolers or young adults who have just graduated from college, they may not have the same awareness of the world and how this little trick that they might be doing could affect friends and neighbors and people all the way around the world. And so it's an immaturity of a global view is one of the factors. And then again, money. If someone pays enough money, they may be coerced into doing something that they shouldn't be.
So now we've covered what was virus, so let's move on to malware. What is malware, and what's the difference between that and virus?
Well, malware is an umbrella term for viruses and other forms of bad programs. So mal, the same preface that we would use on many things that are bad, and ware being the short version of software. So it just means any software that has say bad purpose.
So when you have virus protection, like we've talked about here from McAfee or Norton or some of the other services, that it's looking for something that could be under the umbrella of malware also.
Yes. So while they're sold perhaps under the unofficial name of virus protection because it's a more familiar term, it is scanning for and looking for other forms of malware. And I'll give you an example of something that is malware that's not a virus, and those are invasion of privacy for specifically something called a Keystroke Logger. So every key that you type on the keyboard may be logged and sent off to somebody else so that they can find out your password, your bank account number, your social security number, and so forth and so on. Anything you typed on the keyboard, it will collect and send to somebody. It's not a virus because it's not replicating itself, but it definitely has evil intention there to invade your privacy.
Now, what you just described, does that come under the heading of that third group called spyware, or spyware is something else?
So spyware is a larger group than just a keystroke logger, but spyware in general is about observing what you're doing on your computer, again, for privacy purposes or invasion of privacy purposes. So if I want to steal your identity, I put some form of spyware on your computer. It could be a keystroke logger. It could be some other program that's looking through the files on your computer. So it doesn't matter what you type. It's looking to see if, say, you have text cut or H&R block piece of software on your computer, and therefore looking for the tax records that you filled out last year, the year before, so forth and so on. And from that, I may find social security numbers and addresses and your income, and perhaps even bank account numbers. If you gave the IRS the bank account number to get your refund, that data is on that computer somewhere. So you don't have to type something with that particular program. You've already typed it. It's on that disk somewhere. And if it's not an encrypted file, then it can be shipped off to somebody.
So, all right, now at least we've covered the terminology. What should the average unknowing member of the public who has really no understanding of what that computer is doing, all they know is just do what I want you to do? You know, I was told that it'll do something and I want that function performed. Okay, and that's as much as they know about a computer. They can get email, they can type letters, you know, like you said, spreadsheets or tax records or whatever, but that's as much as they know. I mean, it's not like what a professional programmer is trying to do with a computer. What can that person do to prevent damage to their computer or sharing of private information?
There are a number of relatively simple things that include keeping your software up to date, including the operating system and the specific applications you use.
So Microsoft, if you're using a Microsoft program, or Apple, if you're using Apple, they pretty much have automatic updates. So you want to make sure that those are turned on?
Yes.
Okay.
You want to get those security updates because the reason why they're updating things is that they've discovered a problem. They've discovered a hole in the protection system. And so they're sending that out to prevent someone from abusing that.
Okay.
So keeping your software, including your operating system, up to date, using a malware or virus protection software, which hopefully everyone is doing, and using good passwords. So I can do damage to your computer records if I can guess your password. There was an example a couple of years ago publicized far and wide that someone had figured out Sarah Palin's password, and they were able to send out email from her account. Well, they figured out what her password is because she used a combination of facts from her life that were publicly available. And so when you pick a password, it should be something that only you know, is easy to remember but not easy to guess. And those two things together can be difficult to come up with. But if you're using a combination of at least one letter, at least one lowercase letter, at least one uppercase letter, and something that's not a letter or a number, then you probably have a pretty good password.
And how many how many keystrokes would you suggest in a password? I mean, some people, you know, like 3, 4, 5, and that's good enough for them. But you go someplace and they say, oh, you know, weak, strong, or no, not good enough. So what is it that you suggest that is not uncrackable, but you know, just makes it difficult for anybody?
Well, you bring up a good point. I'll answer your question, and I want to come back to something you just brought up.
By the way, we have about 5 minutes left here, so we're
okay. So quickly, 8, 9 letters or characters as a minimum for a password would probably be a good idea. But you mentioned uncrackable. There's absolutely no computer system that's uncrackable. Any computer system can be compromised. The security system can be compromised. Basically, your idea, your strategy for yourself is to simply make yourself a less appealing target than someone else.
When you say that anybody can be cracked, I've heard, and I don't know what it actually means, but there's some sort of a system in which it's like you're forced. I mean, it like the attack is like just a series of code that just keeps getting sent in a large number of codes are being sent into your machine until finally it just can't stand it anymore. It's and
that's called a denial of service attack, and that sort of thing is done against online vendors. So if someone has a vendetta against Amazon.com, they might just keep pounding their web server with what looks like customers, but it's not really, until their servers can't handle it anymore, and basically take them out of business. And that gets into a topic perhaps we'd need to save for another conversation, that there's a third motivation for malware, and that's for political activity. The term hacktivism.
Warfare
and
too.
warfare, right. So government-sponsored political activity. There was a war in the state, not the state of Georgia, part of the United States, but Georgia is part of the Soviet Union, was attacked by Russia, and primarily over the internet, and taking down computer systems first.
Does SIU have any kind of help labs for people who might have been attacked and now their computer's kind of like, it just isn't operating the way that they want?
We're not in that business. We do help our own students and staff and faculty who encounter that problem, but we don't have...
Not the general public?
Not the general public.
Well, there's a business opportunity you guys are missing.
Absolutely. Perhaps we'll consider that.
Yeah. I almost want to talk, but we're so short on time, so let's just keep this really, really limited. I've heard and read in the press a lot of stories about China or Chinese people being involved in attacks on United States computers. Is this true? And if it is true, what is it? Is this like practice runs, or what are we doing here? You got about 30 seconds.
Oh, that's going to be tough to answer in 30 seconds.
I know,
okay, so to the best of my knowledge, it is true.
It is true.
But I don't know that even the United States government knows unequivocally if it's the Chinese government sponsoring this activity. There's activity that starts in China, or it appears to start in China, and they have done interesting things, not just in the United States, but in other countries. And by interesting things, I mean malicious activity. And it's not just over the internet, but through other means of trying to gain military intelligence. And there's one theory that says that the Chinese government shut down the power system in a South American country not very long ago.
Very interesting. We're going to have you back and talk more about that subject. I want to thank you very much for coming here and spending some of your busy time with us today. Very much appreciated. And to my audience, I've been speaking with Dr. Bouvier from SIU Edwardsville Engineering School. See you next week.